Our guest today is the CEO of Open Matters. He's a digital advisor to some of the greatest companies in the world, including Goldman Sachs and, of course, ESPN. He's a very successful angel investor as well as a best-selling author. His most recent book, The Network Imperative, How to Survive and Grow in the Age of Digital Business Models, is a great read. It's just like 7 Habits of Highly Successful People by Stephen Covey, but it's for individuals and corporations that want to thrive in this digital era. It's also published by HBR, Harvard Business Review, which of course is one of our partners. So we're delighted to have Barry here today. Barry, welcome.
Thank you, Anthony, for having me to be here today.
Great. Barry, if we can just start with a sort of leadership warm-up, if you like. You know, you've studied the subject of leadership for a long time. You're also a great leader in your own right. So what is the best piece of leadership advice you've ever received?
So I find that leaders really don't understand the sources of value. So they don't really know how to organize their companies to succeed in today's digital world. They confuse things with websites and content with being a digital business. And that's just not today's world. So today's world is about building networks, not about building products and services.
Yeah, it's the whole what business are we in mantra.
Correct. And what most business leaders still think they're in the business of selling somebody something or some service or some product. So it's a crazy idea for them to think, wow, maybe the customer can serve his or herself and ultimately provide content that they're interested back to each other rather than me forcing stuff upon them.
This is getting into the book, the whole world of scale and digital beauty. If one book that you'd recommend that has not been authored or co-authored by your good self?
Oh, fantastic. I have 2 books I absolutely adore. Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus. I know it's not a well-known management book, but it basically says guys spend the whole time killing each other, shooting at each other, right, with 2 guns. And the other great book by Deborah Tannen, it's called You Just Don't Understand, another great book. But it's about the fact that we speak bilaterally. I say one thing, you hear another thing. And that's a good example how companies advertise. They're really advertising and producing content for themselves, not for their customers, because customers would never create ads, as we've seen in Doritos. Doritos, the winners every single year, are produced by the customer when they do ads.
Yeah, the customer voice is everything.
That's correct.
You advise a lot of CEOs. Is there any CEO that really jumps out in your mind as a world-class CEO that gets some of the stuff we're about to talk about? Or is there sort of, any sort of key traits that make for a world-class CEO?
Well, I think everybody would say today Mark Zuckerberg's a world-class CEO, but his whole thesis is very different than all the CEOs that I basically counsel. My CEOs are more like me. They're 62, they're white, they're guys, right? And so you might call me an old white guy. And those CEOs are youngsters, right? They're 28 or 30. And the big difference between my generation and my children's generation is my generation is all about me, which is what am I going to do to serve my needs? In Mark's generation, my son's generation, it's all about you, which is how are you going to basically produce the content you want that you can deliver on Instagram or Pinterest that you're interested in, and I just give you the platform to let you do that.
Yeah, okay. Which exactly brings us onto the book, which is, The Network Imperative. You've written 5 books in the past. You've written thousands of articles for HBR, Wall Street Journal, and of course, Wharton. Why this book? Why now?
So after saying what I just said, and you just asked me the question you just did for all these years, I think I finally came up with the concept that the only way I'm going to break through to leaders of today's generation, which is 98% of all leaders, look more like me than look like these camera guys who are filming us today, which are half our age, is very simply, I had to give proof that in fact the world had moved from a business model that was about me, the company, to a business model that's around you. I don't mean customer voice. It literally is around you, where you're the producer, you're the supplier, you, the network, are more economically advantaged, and that network economics are very different than supply side or economies of scale. And what we found when we researched all publicly traded companies in the US, which I know applies across the world, is network economics win. They just rule the world. Right. And supply side or economies of scale lose.
Okay. So I know, for example, if I speak to venture capitalists, highbrow venture capitalists, they'll generally say, is it scalable? Is it a platform? And obviously, is it digital and tech? So I get it. But the platform, LinkedIn, Airbnb, that's how you make the billions in this day and age. But is the book for setting up a platform from scratch, or is it for the sort of the big companies that are sort of haven't done that from scratch that are wondering how they're going to compete in this digital platform age?
So the book is for the 98% of the companies that have never done this before. And the reason we wrote it for the 98%, only 2% really understand what you just said, that we need to be a platform organization with a network, with digitally capable people, which is every one of us carrying around a mobile phone. That's only 2% of the world. The other 98% is still doing business the old-fashioned way, which is building products and services that they send through a pipe. Yeah. A platform is where anybody can sit on that platform, and that means customers, suppliers, investors, and exchange products and services, co-create the future, and let them share in the economics like they do in the Apple Developer Network.
But like companies like Airbnb and Facebook, it's a platform, isn't it? So isn't there a certain amount of limit to how many platforms and Airbnbs that you can have? I mean, the asset providers, the old asset companies, building the hotels, you still need them, don't we?
Yes, we still need physical assets in the world, right? They're fantastic. I mean, I stayed in a hotel I loved here in Britain called the Conrad Hilton, great hotel. But there will be infinite numbers of platforms, just like there's infinite numbers of assets, because when it comes down to it, you and I will participate in micro platforms that are uniquely tailored to our wants and needs. So right now, if I'm sitting on the LinkedIn platform, that's a general resume platform. But maybe I need to sit on a micro platform for what I do is deal with boards. Right. And they need a micro platform that serves them so they can find the people they want that are on that platform. And maybe I'm in the biotech industry, a micro platform, because that's where we live our lives. To be accurate, I really think when the world's all said and done, there'll be platforms for every one of us in the world. And it will be almost the opposite of people think. I am the center of my own network, and I will serve the people and interact with the people around my wants and needs.
Yeah, okay. But let's just say you're an ExxonMobil or a GE or a Walmart, one of the huge companies. Are you suggesting, actually, let's go back to just to get the 4 definitions, because you talk about there's 4 business models out there. Can you just elaborate on what those are? Give us some examples of some brands in the 4.
Sure. So the reason we studied value first, before we went on to the questions like you're asking me about digital platforms, is why should someone do it before what should they do or how should they do it, right? And everybody wants to do what and how, but Simon Sinek wrote a great book called Start With Why. So what is the why? And the why is value. And let's just look at it. We found that there were 4 ways to build value in the world. One is things, right? Like this chair or these walls or like gas or oil. It's all thing-based, right? Anything that you can think about. You can back these cameras, right? So things, like resources, natural resources, is the first way of generating value. It's the oldest business model in the world. Make something, sell something. The second way is to service something, produce some information, healthcare services, right? Financial services, Maytag services, the Maytag man, right? We make a Maytag machine, we need a Maytag man, maybe even a Maytag woman, right? Number 1. Number 2 is services, consultants, doctors, lawyers, bankers. The third one is technology, right? Which is instead of serving somebody, technology is about serving yourself, right? Setting up the opportunity to serve yourself, deliver some technology. I can sit on that platform, I can produce my own content, I can type my own words, I can search my own information like Google. That's third generation, number 3. And the fourth one is platforms or business models around relationships, either inanimate relationships, which is called the Internet of Things, or animate things, you and me. Now here's the real problem. The old business models are worth 1 times revenues, approximately, or less. Now, people go, why? You mean revenues or earnings? And I really mean revenues, 1 times revenues or less, which means the oldest industries, I hate to say this, are a bit in the crapper. The newer industries, services are not much better. They're 2 times revenues, right? The Accentures, all the healthcare services, financial services, they're commodities now. It's really a race to the bottom. The third industry, or the third generation of business models, tech. The reason those are so valuable, it's what I think, what I know, not what I do or what I own. One more time. What I own is things. What I do is labor. What I know, you could be having thoughts the way I'm right now, like I'm having thoughts about you, you're having thoughts about me that we're not talking about. Hopefully they're both good, but there's a lot of thoughts going on in our heads. What I know is infinitely scalable. We can have 1 million thoughts a minute. And if we can translate into technology, ones and zeros, infinitely valuable, it can be shared. And then the power of connection, who we know and who machines know, is algorithmically large. And so those things are worth 8 times revenues versus tech businesses are worth 4 times revenues, round numbers. Services businesses are worth 2 times revenues, round numbers. Asset companies are worth 1. So today, ExxonMobil has to build a platform for the sharing of content among things and people to be competitive. Otherwise, they're going to be worth 1/8 the value of Facebook.
Yeah, I get you. So it's for the asset builders. You said they're worth 1. It sucks generally, but are you saying that they should change their primary business model over to be the network orchestrator, or are you suggesting that they should acquire businesses that have a blend of those 4, or layer network orchestrator style strategies and tactics above their asset business model? Which is it? I mean,
so I love your question. The answer is yes. It's all the above, right? Because it's too hard for an ExxonMobil or GE to say, gee, I'm going to become a network orchestrator of my specific area, right? I'm going to orchestrate all the plane parts. Yeah. I'm going to make sure they're all digitally enabled. So every single plane part, which is what they're doing, basically generates as the Internet of Things, which is a large network, back information that the mechanics can ultimately use as knowledge, and the machines will start self-learning. It's called machine learning language. Will start learning and self-adjusting itself so that the people who service them can literally learn from the machine itself. Yeah. That's a big transition for GE, but it's something they're working on. ExxonMobil has to think the same thing. When I go fill up with gas, they don't know anything about me. Seems pretty stupid, right? Same thing with BMW or Mercedes-Benz or Jaguar. They don't know anything about me as a purchaser. So once they begin to understand, have a relationship with me, they can build a platform that allows me and them to benefit. So they need to do all of the above. Buy platforms, build platforms, but they need to put their head around the fact that my future relies on my relationship with you and your relationship with your peers, not on the future functionality of my cars or my oil.
Got you. Okay. So that's a massive mind shift, isn't it, in the organization? Like, for example, the size of that network could be absolutely phenomenal. So they're not key network orchestrators, but they have a network asset that they can start leveraging.
Every business, I think you've hit the nail on the head, every business has a network asset, a dormant network asset that they've been, you might want to say they've been in some shapes abusing by hitting them with email blasts on a regular basis. In some cases, not even talking to because they don't have their email names. And in some cases, not even knowing that they have a set of networks, supplier networks, customer networks, prospect networks. You wouldn't fire people and not treat them well anymore because you have alumni networks. You have all these amazing networks that if you treat them well and you give them something of value, you can, for the first time, connect them, not just to yourself, to sell them more stuff, but to each other, that allows you to grow exponentially and algorithmically and generate extraordinary value. But you've got to tenderize and keep them in a way that they want to be loved. Otherwise, they're not going to pay attention to you.
Yeah, and in the next interview, we'll start talking about collaboration, because as you say, collaborating, seeing customers as collaborators and contributors as opposed to customers is a key shift in being able to do that, isn't it? But talking about the acquisition side or the building of a network orchestrator, so you've got the sort of the layer on top, but if you wanted to actually get in and create your own network from scratch, is it better generally for large cos to acquire or build on their own?
Well, I really like what you're doing here, which is that you're beginning to build quality content that's not just about a product or service that you're selling, that allows people to see you as a trusted advisor, a third-party fiduciary, someone who is just trying to provide value to the organization and to the individual, much like TED Talk does. And so by doing that, by providing quality content, you can begin to relate to me as a customer and as a person interested in the knowledge and LeadersIn, whatever it is. And by using that quality content, you can, for the first time, reconnect with the customer who's thinking about, wow, I really want a relationship with Informa. This is amazing content. How fantastic is that? If I want to be a leader in something, I need to turn to Anthony and this new team that's building leadership content from, so I can be a leader in the future as well.
Yeah, I like the fact you like what we're doing here. That's
You're doing
fantastic.
a great job.
Is there any large company you think that's doing this very well? I mean, you talk about Google X and Google in your book, having an incubator, but having that incubator down the road and allowing failure within the business.
So there are a lot of companies that are finally beginning to think like Silicon Valley, which is a far distance from here, right? Yeah. Something on the order of 6,000 miles. Yeah. So Silicon Valley really understands what we're talking about today. The rest of the world's unsure of it. It's where Uber, Airbnb, in fact, 90% of US startups are within a 30-mile radius of Silicon Valley or of Apple. It tells you a lot that this is a real startup network up there. They have a real ecosystem. And I'm from Boston, not from Silicon Valley. And so I think what we're seeing is that people are beginning to mimic now Silicon Valley by opening up corporate campuses and hiring some of that DNA into their organizations. So GM has just put $500 million into Lyft, which is a ride-sharing organization. Apple just put another $1 billion into, I think it's Uber, if I'm correct, in the most recent round. And so you're seeing these organizations that are larger putting huge money into startup environments so they can get the DNA they need to be network first, digital second, product and service is further down the road, which is, again, a complete different shift in thinking. Most organizations are revenue first, product and service second, mobile someplace down the road, digital, who the heck knows where it is. Maybe it's digital marketing, but it's not a digital-first organization. It's sure as heck not a network-first organization.
Yeah. So how is that going to change in the mindset of the big play businesses out there where you do need revenue to keep the lights on? But it is one of those things. It's if you just chase the revenue, it's just like going around chasing your tail. You never quite get there, right? You've got to create the value first, and the network first, the conversations first, and make money later.
That's correct. So what you've just said is one of the most important parts of the book, is that we tell leaders, and I've told leaders for a long time, you have to do a headstand. Now, most of my male leaders don't know how to do a headstand. They're not yoga professionals. So they don't know how to do what's called an inversion. But they can begin to invert their mindsets. They can begin to think, wow, this is a complete different way of thinking. I need to put the network first. I need to put the technology that enables the network second, and then, which is the digital platform, cloud-based, social-based, mobile-based, big data-based, which has a lot of implications second. And then I need to let that live and literally prosper with curated content, both from them and from people like what you're doing with me. And then once they get going, the network will begin to shape itself, which is self-organizing. Huge issue. I'm not going to organize it. It's self-organizing. It's self-policing. There's no heavy hand here. There's no advertising directly on top of this content, because people will fall off the network. So they need to keep the business models and the mental models separate until this child gets forged and formed enough that it has enough room, breathing room, that the network now has legs and teeth to it, just like a baby, so that the parent, I hate to say this, doesn't destroy the child before it's born.
Right, got you. Okay. No,
I don't want to abort the birth before we get started.
Yeah. But people always worry that the consumers or the people on a network are going to start abusing the ability that they have and can communicate via this network and use it as a communications tool. Do you have to just allow for that to happen, or are you quite heavy-handed?
The network is already tired of being abused, right? If they receive, I said, if you go into a store and every single time they say, "How can I help you?" what they really mean is, "How can I sell you something?" Right. Except for the Apple Store, which says, "How can I help you?" You know they mean that. But there's no other store you can walk into and, "Gee, I'm just going to be helped." It's an amazing thesis, right? Yeah. I'm going to be happy just sitting here, trying things on, playing with things. It's a great experience. Yeah. Except for the Apple Store, everybody else is, how do you sell something? So it's going to take a while for most companies to get the network to begin to be comfortable again, sharing, because they've been abused so often by companies. And so it's got to become about something I'm going to call company loyalty. They want to talk about customer loyalty. I think that's backwards. I think we need to think about company loyalty. How am I going to be loyal enough to you, the customer, long enough that you once again believe that what I say, "How can I be helpful to you?" I mean.
So you mentioned in the book that obviously network orchestrators have got the massive advantage of the fact they can grow revenue faster. They've got generated higher margins than the asset. So I totally get that. But does the fact that the ability to build a platform like Airbnb and the fact that it's inherently easier to do that, I'm not saying it's easy, but it's easier to do that than build 1,000 hotels around the world like Intercontinental Hotel Group. Does it not mean that the barriers to entry is lower, so therefore it's easier to disrupt a disruptor? For example, it's easier to disrupt build another platform and put a new angle in to try and get them to love you and love that platform than it is to build 1,000 hotel groups, for example?
I think that's a great question. I don't think the world knows the answer to it yet. I would suggest the following, that it is easier to disrupt the hotel than it is to disrupt our relationship. There's an old expression by Carl Jung, which was a psychiatrist who's since passed away, which is that which is most enduring is most valuable. So although I think a building is highly enduring, right, it's tangibly valuable. I might go back to the Conrad Hilton again. It was a great experience. I thought the hotel was great. I have a stronger affinity to our conversations and the video guys that we're working with today than I do that hotel. I built a relationship before we get started. I now know who you are. You know who I am. We'll come back together again if we treat each other with respect. And I'll trust that relationship. I'm not saying I won't trust the hotel. I will. But I have a greater sense that if we all begin to trust the fact that relationships are enduring and stop treating each other as transactions, that the platform businesses will be the most valuable businesses.
Yeah. So we interviewed Mike Lynch, the founder of Autonomy, and he was laughing at the fact that anybody would try to compete with Facebook and try and compete a social, as you said, that network, the relationships we have on there, it's very, very hard to disrupt something like Facebook, and that is going to be a long enduring example of what you're talking about.
Right. I think Facebook with no one's ever had 1.6 billion customers, not even the church, right? The Roman church has 1.6 billion, nor does the Islams, nor the Jewish populations. Not even the Chinese population is bigger than Facebook. Facebook is a nation bigger than any other nation, right? 1.6 billion people. We've never seen something like that. And what we should realize, the only reason they got that big is because no one cared about their customers. Because Facebook's customers are every company's customers. That means no one cared about their customers. Otherwise, you would never have seen that happen. Which means every company didn't care enough about their customers, so Facebook did something brilliant. They just outsourced the thing that mattered the most, customers. Now every company in the world is renting their customers back. What a crazy idea. And Facebook is charging a lot for it, as they should, because no one cared about you and me. So I think it's hard to disrupt Facebook. I do think Facebook could make a mistake and disrupt itself. Mark Zuckerberg and Sheryl Sandberg could decide to lean in too much and start abusing you and I, and we realize this is nothing but an advertising play for those guys. We're out of here. So I think there is the chance of them making the error, not us or some other competitor doing it.
Okay. Because that thing, when you're so big, even a Facebook can become complacent.
Correct.
And so that's the potential danger. They trip up themselves.
That's correct. They have built an amazing population, but like any population, if you don't have good leaders, whether it be any religious population, the Pope, could have a bunch of Roman Catholics who abuse children in Boston, it's like the newest movie. Ultimately, they lose their followers.
They lose the followers, right? Okay. Are we talking about privacy here? Is that how they could trip themselves?
Oh, absolutely. They can trip themselves by bad leadership, giving away people's data. There is a lot of ways leaders can trip themselves up.
He's done pretty well. As you said, he's created the platform, 51 billion, I think he was worth of 2016. He's done pretty well. So, but the final question before...
Not as well as you, I hope. I'm hoping you're telling me...
I mean, 51 billion is not enough to live on, in my opinion. But it's a good start.
Okay, great. As long as we're okay with that for you, I'm good.
I don't think he'll get his lights turned off this winter. Final question, and I think this is a really key point that you mentioned in the book. You say, Deloitte found 53% of executives see technology enablers or disruptors on the horizon, and companies they consider as a threat to their current business models. And you continue to say, and Forrester found that more than 75% of executives believe their companies do not have the technology, people, processes, or capabilities to build reasonable, responsive digital strategies. So is it about, within the large companies, I'm not talking about building a network orchestrated from scratch, but I'm talking about the Eons and the Exxon Mobils and stuff. Is it about changing the mindsets of the people you have, or is it ultimately, if that's too difficult, changing the people?
So the answer is yes again to that. To both those questions. The mindset of leaders need to get their head around the fact that networks first in the digital age is the reality of our future. If we don't have a network, we're going to be subsumed by people who have networks like Facebook in every industry who we're going to have to rent our customers from. And we're going to have to rent our content from. We will just be supply chain of product and services. We'll be commoditized to hell, right? So they have to get there. So it means they have to change their mindset, because then they have to do something really important, is they have to change how they spend their money. They have to invest in initiatives like yours to build the capabilities and the content and the technology so that you stand toe-to-toe with the people who produce traditional products and services, so that the businesses can find its way into the future.
Yeah, beautiful. And just to clarify one last point before we wrap this first interview up.
Anything for you, Anthony.
Thank you, sir. You're very kind indeed. Would you sign the book?
Absolutely.
Done. Definition of the network. I understand it's not just customers. A lot of people think, oh, we have a comments form on our website. That's interaction with customers. That's not network engagement. In fact, you go on and you say it's all around it's the stakeholders, who include customers, prospects, employees, alumni, suppliers, distributors, interrogators, investors, communities, peers, and competitors, right? So it's about embracing and enriching all of the relationships throughout that. That's the network.
That's the network. And people have never thought that way, right? They've never thought, wow, can I take an inventory of everybody who I've interacted with? Can I appreciate their distinction and their differences? And can I organize myself? This is far beyond customer loyalty or customer centricity, because it's everybody. The network is bigger than just customers. Can I organize everybody the way Amazon does in a variety of capabilities where they can all interact and all benefit?
It's going to be a beautiful world. Thank you very much indeed, Barry, for the first interview.
Thanks for having me today.